coming here, I thought, well, I'm a bit of a usurper because even though I'm talking about rivers, a lot of them are sort of buried under the mud and all along the coastline as well. So it's really a bit of a maritime river system. And I thought a bit of a usurper, but then yesterday, after seeing the talks, I recognized it did fit in quite well. I mean, a lot of the channels and rivers we'll be talking about, they're totally buried, but so were they yesterday when we talked about the Ptolemaic river systems in Egypt. Oops. In Egypt, that Israel and Eleanor were talking about. So bear with me, and so I feel it's justified having all these mudflats. But I wanted to just outline first of all this video, which you may well have seen. I can get it. Practice. Okay, it'll work. It'll work. Go. There. We're good. Just to give you an outline about how these mudflats were formed, and to demonstrate that they really are related to the rivers. So, following the last interglacial, then you have the Ice Age. As we know, a lot of it was dry land. Sea level rose, and as it rose, it filled up all these river valleys. But these river valleys, as we were discussing in detail yesterday, as Miles was talking about and the rest of the gang, these river valleys have always been, and these waterways have always been popular for people to live in, both in the Bronze Age and earlier Neolithic and Mesolithic, and of course in the Paleolithic, which meant that these are centers of artifacts and objects and habitation through many, many thousands of years, not just the more recent times. So I'm going to take you back to these earlier periods before these rivers filled up, of course, as I mentioned. Oops, let's see if I can get beyond that. And where we're going to focus is in the Solent. And in the Solent around, well, I will mention actually the submerged peat platform at Bouldnor Cliff, because I have to include that, because it was once a river, part of a waterway, and also this area here where the black lines just appeared around the New Forest, where the water systems empty into the Western Solent, to show you what's surviving on the foreshore there. So the way that the Solent formed, the Western Solent, was actually not exactly as you saw it in the slide before, but it formed with the river running from, well, I'll do this with turning around, the river running from Lymington out through here, and this area here in the middle was a lake, and it was a waterway. Bouldnor Cliff was on the edge of that waterway. Then the sea came up and it flooded this side first. Then only about maybe 3,000 years ago, it broke through here, and this became an open seaway. So until that point, this was by a river. It was very much riverine. And then when this did break through, it actually started to erode what was in there. Prior to that, the mudflats that I showed you at the beginning used to stretch right into the middle here, and now they're all being eroded away. So what we have below the water at Bouldnor Cliff is an area of old mudflats here, and this line is the edge of the mudflats, and that's where the erosion is happening, all in the middle. So if you go under the water, you can see this is a multi-beam image. I know you're maritime archaeological ists and types, so you'll understand this is a bathymetric image. It's color contoured, about 4 meters at the top, down to 11 meters on this sort of peat platform here, or woodland bench, 11 meters. And then this area here is all the peat type salt marsh deposits that have built up through time. And then this is a stretch of coastline that's salt marsh is being eroded away because the new water was introduced, the waterway was introduced. And we've been looking along this area. There's about 5 kilometer of peat deposit at the bottom here. And we've been looking along the sites, and we're starting to discover, we have been for the last 20 odd years, lots of archaeological material. Going first to BC2, which is that one I flagged here, BC2, which is where there's some collapsing underlying seabed because of erosion. We're finding some interesting sites. And with a section through the site on the left there, you can see a sort of a section showing you the platform at the bottom that's in 11 meters, a cross section through the site, 11 meters of water. You've got that silt built up to, oh, I should say that the platform at the bottom now dates about 8,000 years ago. So it's an 8,000-year-old seabed, going up the slope through the peat deposits, through the silts, and then there's peat at top, which is about sort of 6,500 years ago. So all these sort of 7-meter high cliff was deposited over a period of about 1.5 to 2,000 years. Now I would say it was deposited, it was stable for many years, now it's eroding away, and as you can see, it's a difficult site to dive. Visibility is dodgy, suspect. the diver. But at the bottom, just here, is actually defended by trees. And that picture on the far right-hand side is a tree stump that's sort of sticking in the peat. And these are sort of line of defense, which is why the peat is eroding at a slower rate than the trees above. But areas that the peat is eroding quite quickly is where it's being interfered with by the likes of lobsters. Now, this lobster here was interesting because it's one that drew us to the archaeological material in the first place. In front of the burrow, in the upcast here, we found these flints back in the 1998. So a bit while ago, but I will come more modern imminently. And above it, you can see a large tree. So when we first dived the site, I thought, wow, this is incredible. We're diving on it to look at the sort of coastal change. But then when I saw these trees, we thought we got to get a big project here and start doing lots of surveys. And with the help of lobsters and also, with the help of lobsters, we discovered the site. We dug into the back of the lobster's burrow, and we discovered that there's, again, you see at the bottom, the lower level there, you've got this sandy, sort of silty deposit, above which is a nice peat horizon, dates to, say, actually 8,000 years ago. And then above that, you've got the buildup of clays. So this was the first site that we found stratified underwater, albeit that you can see the flints aren't on a nice even horizon. Most of them are actually coming from the sandy humic deposit below, which was once a freshwater sandbar by the side of a river. And now that's being eaten away by lobsters and also eels and the current. They're burrowing into it and they're popping out these lithics all over the place. Nice little bladelets there, burnt flints. I'm not sure how clear that image is. It was a bit dark. And indeed, we get them both working together side by side, lobster and an eel, and constantly digging material out to such an extent that we're finding hundreds of lithics down there. And they're coming from being eroded out the bank rather than being excavated, being eroded out the bank, and they're sort of being deposited in front of the cliff itself. We're finding tools like these adzes on the left and in the middle, and the heads of adzes in the back there, and plenty of scrapers and blades and bladelets as well. So in the last sort of 20 years, by diving the site and sort of monitoring where the material is coming from, we found almost 2,000 artifacts. Now, they're not gold and shiny and silver like Garry's wonderful stuff, but we are picking up these individual, very small material, all the ubiquitous flints everywhere, and recording roughly where they come from. Now, this is a slide with a drone showing the Isle of Wight on the surface, then underwater, and that's about 150 meters wide. Underwater, scale of 1 to 100, you've got a little section of the submerged peat, submerged deposit, the silt that's being eroded away by the lobsters. And so here, that's by the lobsters and eels. And so what you have here is the silt, which I've been describing. It was deposited, the mudflat silt. Here we've got that sandy underneath it, so it's all breaking, falling off the top of it. And out the sand, you've got all these lithics. So these ones here were recovered in 2019, all from in front. And you see the general distribution, roughly from in front of the where they came from in front of the cliff there as it falls apart. When we looked in a bit closer at some of the cliffs, some of the sections, we find that, say, they're very, the lithics are pretty much very, a bit of a palimpsest within the sand itself. We haven't found any really nice sites. So until very recently, I said, because just last weekend, actually Sunday, came up with this particular artifact. Looks like a hammerstone. Well, it's saying it looks like a hammerstone. There's a similar item to this, but found in Exmoor, which they've defined as a hammerstone. I think it's more like a pestle. You can see on here, we've got some of the mud from the seabed where it came from. So it came from actually next to the site where the sand was from, and you can see some of the marine growth on the outside. So it hasn't been exposed for very long. The site's eroding away. It won't be there for much longer. But following Philippa's and Sabina's discussions and talks yesterday, trying to work out whether it was dropped, whether it was sacrificed to a trophy. And I think by looking at some of the dating of some of the material here, we might get an idea. And that's because we can then work out where it is in relation to the inundation at the time. So had the site been slightly inundated, had it then been dropped, or was it dropped at a time when it was dry land? And this is, I'm afraid this isn't very clear because I only found this artifact last Sunday, and so just had to pull together some images quite quickly. And what this is, which I think I put in last night, what this is that the same area where there's erosion here. There's under the cliff, there's a material at top. There's everything falling down under here with the sandy bits, with the lobsters and eels around here. But this particular item was found here in amongst the trees, which haven't yet eroded away. So that's where the woodland bench, as we call it, is still in place. And these are sort of root systems here and here and here. And there's the artifact just tucked in under the trees. So we're now going to have to date the sediment with it and see how that relates with the rest of the landscape. Now, what's great about the landscape isn't just the fact that it's got thousands of flints and work tools, it's the level of preservation for organic material. And here's your woodland bench, there's your silts, just take you somewhere else. This particular site here, BC5, is 400 meters away from BC2, but it's a totally different environment. And it's full of, well, trees. I suppose trees everywhere down there. And trees, and here I've showed, this is a 3D model of the site. You got that's that tree that you just saw. Now it's pretty much eroded away now. There's other trees coming out here. Now there, actually, you can see the roots associated with these trees. What I was going to show you now are wood artifacts, which you find over here, these wood features here, here, and over here. And these wood features were sort of what look like platforms. They've been finding, we found 5 of them on the site. And we kept bringing them up and showing people, and said, you know, recording them and showing people, said, have you seen anything like it? And of course, people hadn't, and generally haven't, because there's so little maritime archaeology, or so little Mesolithic material. This is all the 8,000-year-old material around, apart from places like Star, slightly different. 8,000-year-old material around. And so we're then looking at it, and we're finding all sorts of timbers. We weren't sure what they were. No one could actually identify what they were because there aren't any parallels. But you can see lots of working. This one on the top's a post. I'm not sure what the bottom one is. Maybe with some cut marks in, maybe a wedge of some form. But we weren't quite sure. And no one could really say to us, well, of course, it's something significant, because they hadn't seen it, or most experts in the country, until we found this particular piece of timber here. And this here, going back to, I think, what Mark was saying, and Andy was saying yesterday, this flat bit here is the base of, most probably, the base of a logboat. And that's because it's tangentially split. I won't go into too much detail now, but it's a tangentially split timber, which meant it was very wide, very flat, and either it was a massive plank, and the Mesolithic didn't really walk around with massive planks, or it could be the base of a log boat that's split out. Again, just believe me, it's true. And there's lots and lots of other material there to back this up. And lots of burnt chop bits of wood and everything to show that it was actually carbonized and knocked apart, lots of worked timbers. But a main feature we had were these sort of, a very significant feature, let's say, with all these bits like bits of here, bits like here, which were bits of bark. And these had been split from the side of the tree. And we discovered those bits of timber on the seabed, as I showed before, were all bits of bark. We went to Kew Gardens, had a few bark specialists look at them. And they said all sort of bark rounded on one side, flat on the other, and they'd been positioned around the area. And it wasn't until we came across this particular site with over 60 pieces of worked, well-organized bits of timber forming a platform about 2 meters wide that we realized it was part of a significant structure, and it was an analog against which we could compare all the other wooden platforms. And you can see here, as we slightly reconstruct it, you can see the nature of the putting it back together and how it's rebuilt. Lots of flat timbers, crisscross, right angles to each other, and roundwood underneath and bark on the surface. And what was significant as well is it was sitting next to an old fluvial outwash deposit, which was a stream. Again, I'm pulling back to freshwater streams here all the time. And I think, oops, just here, just on here, coming out the base, out here, is scattered around these areas here. You can see all these little old streams that cut down beneath the beneath the landscape itself. So this is all sitting by rivers on sandbars under the water, or under the water now, next to rivers by a sort of a big lake. And other things we found on the site, just to, in case you're not familiar, things like string, 8,000-year-old string, and auroch bones. We mentioned aurochs yesterday, they were discussed, and they're obviously around in the Mesolithic. We found a metatarsal from the site as well, BC2. And what was most significant with this site was the discovery of wheat. This was a few years ago, published in 2015. There's evidence of einkorn on the site that obviously come from somewhere being transported down the riverways from probably Central Europe in a pile. This was a time when the UK was still connected to mainland Europe. You could get there with your big logboats, and perhaps there's one on site here. You can transport it up and down the riverways. There wasn't, we're not saying that there was wheat being grown on the landscape here, there's no evidence of that, but there was wheat going into sort of the North European plains, and if you cross the Meuse and the Rhine, you're getting close to it as possible. There was linking and trading across the waterways. So with that, we have a nice reconstruction, that I think Mark might be a little bit shocked by, but because we have convinced we have a logboat here that we're building, burning out. We have the various vegetation based on the DNA analysis we have for sort of oak and elm, oak and alder, lots of alder, things like apple, and then we have canis in the DNA, so we've got dogs, and then we have someone working over here, someone then working on probably milling the wheat. They haven't got a pestle, but of course we could have had that now because I found one last week. They're milling the wheat ready to make sort of milling to make bread and buns, and that's the work go with the auroch, which is in the background up here. And so possibly we've got the earliest beef burgers in the world on the site. I'm moving on for that, so if we can find some more. We're actually going back, and we have a new project on the site funded by the Leave Trust, working with the University of Warwick, where we're taking those sampling methods we had before. Well, actually, we developed them a bit. We have tubes. I said we developed them. Oops. Sampling methods to work up the cliff, wooden bench, in this particular area at both BC5 and at BC1 to go up the cliff and get DNA analysis and OSL dating and looking at pollen and forams all the way up the cliff to cover the period from over 8,000, in fact, more like 8, 9, 10,000 years ago up to 5,000 years ago. Okay, there you go. And so the methods we've developed here, and then we have award-winning Jess in the middle there. We developed this process of getting the cores, pushing them into the seabed, and stepping up the cliff. And this was something I talked to the National Oceanography Centre about, getting advice for cores. And they said you can buy these cores for you can get a dozen for about £1,000, nicely designed cores, or you can go to B&Q and get them for £10 each. So we did the latter. And so we now got steps all the way up the side of the cliff, which is all undergoing analysis, dating, seed dating, sedimentary, looking at the DNA, sedimentary DNA spread up the whole cliff. And that takes us into the New Forest coastline, which Mark's been keen to get to. New Forest coastline, where what we're going to be doing at this particular site, just off the coastline there, is we're going to actually be taking that sedimentary DNA from the sort of 6,000 over up younger to the Neolithic and up in maybe up to the sort of Roman times as well, because the sediments are there that we can analyze. And so why are the sediments there? Well, this is a map from 1851, Sherman map, Sherman chart, and it shows you there's plenty of mudflats all the way up here. Today, those mudflats are pretty much gone. And instead, you've got a sort of, not quite a hard defence, but a short defence there. Mudflats are all gone. Those are mudflats that in the Sherman chart for 3/4 high tide, and they're all gone now. But what you do have running through them are the remnants of those underwater channels that are filled in, as I described at that moving slide at the beginning. Underwater channels that have been filled up with sediments. And as they filled up with sediments, they protected the land surface below, just as they did with the Bouldnor Cliff site. And the erosion with Bouldnor Cliff was nice because it just sectioned it through. So you just got a nice section through the cliff. Whereas here, the erosion is more sort of horizontal, take it down from the top. And as it takes it down from the top, you have these exposures of peat. Lots of these things that Andy was talking about yesterday. And there, I should say there's exposures of peat all the way from just off, what is it, here to Pitsteep, all the way to the end, which you might be able to make out, to the Hurst Castle. There's several kilometers of peat just exposed on the seabed underwater. Like 10 minutes or so. And that's something to be, and so that's just comparing nicely with the Humber, I thought. Not that I want to compete with the Humber. That was quite funny at 10 o'clock last night. And so what we have here in these deposits are these outcrops of peats and all these trees and things coming out on the edge of this channel here. And when we can see closer, obviously, looking next to them, you can see lots of trees just eroding as this paleo channel becomes exposed. So we looked at that. This was brought to our attention about 5-6 years ago. We looked at it, we dated it 5,200 years ago, thereabouts. So we had some nice Neolithic landscape. Thought, well, it'd be interesting if there's anything else here that's more significant. With one's trained eyes here and there, we had a look around and we started to see interesting looking posts and features. We had no evidence, so we conducted little sondages and did some sampling, looked at these features, scanned them, recorded them. Interesting timber here. We haven't identified the timber yet, but it's covered with some interesting like resin or some such, which could be a defense protective material. Not quite sure whether it's natural or not. But again, these come back to dating around 5,200 years old. So within this landscape, sea level was just down the beach a little bit, but it might be in the very top of the high water. You had occupation. So this is quite interesting. We looked a bit further. We found more samples all around the same sort of date. To scan them, on which we record them, and then we started to do some more analysis to identify where the paleo channel was. The paleo channel was nearby. We did some coring into it to identify when it was actually inundated, and that was inundated about sort of 500-600 years later fully, but it would have been tidal before then. And I show the picture of this chap in the corner here because he happened to be the landowner, so he allowed us to do it, just in case anyone from Historic England questions it. And then what the outcome of that was, we have here a paleo channel at the bottom here. We have an area here where we have all these sort of little posts we found in a line here. But then we also found some interesting timbers on this side of the channel, some wooden elements here, and coming out the other side of the channel itself. So next to the waterway seemed to be an attractive site, as we learned. And that particular timbers over to the left there we looked at, and we were monitoring them. These are about sort of 50 meters away from the channel itself. So we were monitoring it. And then we dated them. They turned out to be Roman, we have the dates there, Roman in date. And this would have been when the sea level was up. So actually, these ones here weren't directly related to the channel, but they would have been related to the Solent as it was. Sea level might have been about a meter or so lower. But it's also important to say that these particular posts aren't that large. And at high water, they would be about 3 or 4 meters, 3 meters underwater. So they would probably might be in a pontoon or some such, tucked in behind the mudflats that were there once upon a time. And we monitored those over a year or two, and they were eroding pretty quickly. So the local landowner supported us to do a survey of the site. There's a 3D model of the site showing the spread of those few posts. And then we excavated half a dozen of them, which are in the process of being preserved and conserved, being sent up to York imminently. And you can see within the landscape, I won't go into too much detail, I haven't got time about the landscape, but there's some nice Roman posts, well preserved in the foreshore there. But, so what we have here, oh yes, so just a bit more interpretation. Here you can actually see the sites, and we've got the dates and the evolving landscape as it's coming to pass. So we've got the issue, we got dry land over here. Yeah, you got dry land on here and here, and the peat coming in slowly, bringing this sort of the influx of the seawater coming in to the fresh water. You got the nice sort of entrance to the waterway there, which I'm going to do now. Other sites we found here in particular, we found some of the Bronze Age material. I thought I'd throw in the Bronze Age because we talked about it so much yesterday. This is a Bronze Age, used to be a Bronze Age fish basket. Another significant site because it's only exposed at lowest water spring tides. This is slightly to the west of the site. That's a submarine barrier behind it. Just in case you wonder what those posts were. Interesting site that we studied and dated. We studied and we got lots of quick hurry up signs coming on here. So that's good. And the Heron dated again, that's Bronze Age, almost 3,500 years old. Sea level would be a bit lower, but it's again quite fragile, and it's one of those sites that would have been tucked in mudflats. One of those particular sites that would have been tucked away, because if it was exposed to the open Solent, it would be gone within sort of minutes in a storm, it'd just be taken away. So it's indicative of coastal change as well as just being an archaeological feature in its own right. So we watch this, and likewise, it's being eroded away quite quickly. And another obvious point here, that these artifacts that have been stable for 4,000 years, suddenly they're exposed and they go. It shows you that they've been stable until that point in the past. So it isn't a transient thing, it's an ongoing. So various sampling has been done, coring of the site. It's now been bagged up and protected until such time as we can try and get support to do something more analysis or display some of the material. And one of the final sites, one of the final or penultimate sites I'm going to look at is the top of the beach. We found all this worked wood. This was only a couple of years ago after we were chased back from the flood. Flooding tide was pushed us back at the beach. Top of the beach, we found these timbers with really distinct cut marks in them, on top and on the side. And we thought they were rather curious, and they warranted further investigation, and they turned out to be Neolithic as well. But these weren't quite 5,000 years old, so a couple hundred years later than the first posts. And then we looked at that post, then we started looking around the area, went from the known to the unknown, and we started to find more, and they were sort of scattered down the beach, running parallel with the Solent. And they weren't just running parallel, some of them were running parallel and perpendicular. So we started dating these to see if they were all linked to each other, because they looked like there could be some order. It could have just been that the trees had fallen down towards, as was discussed yesterday with Andy, they'd fallen down into the water, so they'd slipped and fallen down down slope, as it were, which would be parallel with the perpendicular with the waterway. But some of them were parallel as well, so a bit different. We also looked at them, and as we dated some other features, some of them dated to the earlier occupation, let's say, earlier activity, and the earlier landscape of sort of 3,200 odd years BC, and others to the period just before sort of 5,000 years ago. Then that 288 to 2674 correlates with the stuff at the top of the beach. And so it looks like we had periods of occupation. And with looking at the cut marks and the order of the archaeology, order of the timbers, looked like there seemed to be some form of anthropologic activity putting them in shape. And what you can see here is this is the top of the beach looking down again. You can see some of the lines of timbers in the foreground, and this is an aerial shot. And so just to highlight some of these timbers, you can see these are the top of the beach rather than the ones at the bottom, which do the same sort of pattern. But there were also ones running parallel to the waterway, perpendicular to the Solent, but parallel to the waterway. There's the waterway to the left running downstream. And so one of the ideas would be that what you could have had here, the sea level was rising all the time, the tide was coming in, the estuary was building, getting more and more water access. And now you've got some structure that's building up this somewhat looks more significant by the side of an old water channel that could have taken vessels. And these could be some form of denoted areas that are on the side of the site, although only further excavation and research. We really haven't conducted any excavation as such. We've just been cleaning and clearing, trying to survey the site. Because when you excavate, it comes with all sorts of other responsibilities, as we know. And of course there are posts, that sort of thing. So we've got these interesting sites here that linked Neolithic sites, linked to the ancient waterways that are now filled in. What we haven't done is looked into the bottom of those waterways as of yet to see if we can find lots and lots of nice Neolithic and Bronze Age trinkets. But what I will say, when we're coming to more historical time, another feature, more historical periods, another feature we discovered, final one, is in line with this white line that I've just cut across the screen there. And it's not this particular mark here. That's just part of our surveying technique, denoting some of the areas we're surveying. There's a line running across here, running parallel to the shore. And in the bottom of this line here, you can see these posts, runs right the way through the middle of the Neolithic site. These nice sort of posts all the way here. And there, from the aerial view and in plan view, and all these posts, they run for a period of about 70 meters, and they were just coming to the end now. 70 meters, and they're dated to the medieval time, about the time that we had, oops, here we go. About the time the abbey was set up at Beaulieu, so they're probably associated, probably a palimpsest working along the shoreline leading over to sort of forward the Paleo channel, the channel which would have been running over to the right-hand side here, as we've discovered. So it could have been a bit of a defence to get your carts and your oxen to run through there. Right, coming to the end now. So what do we have? We have a nice sort of paleo channel running through the site. In summary here, we got the paleo land surface on the east side with lots of Neolithic posts. So there's probably some early activity on that site when the tide hadn't quite come in. It's a bit sort of dryish, but not far from the water. Nice ecotone. And then we had an estuary formed about 2,500 years ago, but it would have been coming in before then. In the top of the tide would have been up that channel, and which is why you probably had this Neolithic timbers laid, and maybe other sort of structures or laid down around this sort of area, sort of looking, for storing goods, of course, for transporting over to France. And then bit of a jump there, but hey. And then you've got Bronze Age material on the side here, Roman posts and medieval. So we've got an awful lot of stuff associated with this single paleo channel. We have, in many ways, we haven't scratched the surface because we haven't dug very deep. But the final point I wanted to make was that this submerged archaeological material, and it's material in riverways as well as coastal, because we talked about how riverways change and flood and how they've been sort of manipulated by humans. This change in the riverways and change in the sea is very important to look at, understand people, but it's also very good to understand, look at the environment and to monitor past change, because a lot of these sort of sites are datums around which you can look and see how the landscape has been manipulated or changing now. And this fits very nicely into the UN Decade of Ocean Science with the various outcomes. And in particular here, this is the predicted ocean, where we have the archaeology, we're looking in the foreshore and underwater to help us understand these long-term changes and to inform the science and to feed in a way that hasn't done before, to add value to maritime archaeology, to make it much more significant, or let's say as significant in many other ways as just the heritage aspects. Thank you.